Welcome to A Seat at the Table, Modern Career Paths for Women of Color Lawyers, sponsored by the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division. Moderating the program today is Kernisha Padilla. Kernisha is a conflicts attorney in the Office of the General Counsel at Latham and Watkins, LLP. Kernisha serves as the director of the ABA Women of Color Project and the ABA YLD Vice Director of Professional Development. She also is the Secretary Treasurer of the Chicago Bar Association Young Lawyers Section and Chair of the CBA YLS Women in Law Committee, along with being the recipient of the CBA YLS Rising Star Award and the CBA Alliance for Women Alta May Hewitt Award. Additionally, she serves on several committees throughout the Chicago Bar Federation and the Black Women Lawyers Association. Kernisha, it's all yours.
Thank you. As indicated, my name is Kernisha Padilla, and I'm your moderator. Today, you're in for an uplifting and transparent conversation about what it means to be a woman of color in a non-traditional legal role. As lawyers, we are ingrained with numerous skills, many of which are transferable to other practice areas. Oftentimes, the typical associate track is not the only way to be a successful lawyer. Discovering and acknowledging your skills can enhance your career path by taking you through doors that you may not even knew existed. Join our wonderful panel of women of color lawyers and leaders in their community for a roundtable discussion that will provide valuable insight into pursuing modern options to find your own seat at the table outside of traditional law firm life. Before we dive into our panel, let's take a moment to introduce our esteemed panelists. We have Mariah Blackbird Perry, who is a tribal mitigation manager with the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. Paulina Vera is a professional lecturer in law, or professorial, lecturer in law at George Washington University Law School. Prianka Sharma is the assistant chief counsel with the SBA Office of Advocacy. And Dana Weeks is founder and principal of Thrive Architects, LLC. Thank you all so much for being here today, and let's just go ahead and dive right into this discussion. So I'll start with, I briefly introduce our panelists, of course, but if each panelist can state their name, title, and the current type of work that they do. Priyanka, I'll start with you.
Thanks so much, Kernisha. And just a disclaimer, I'm appearing in my individual capacity, so my remarks don't necessarily reflect any of the views of my agency. That being said, I work for the federal government in the Office of Advocacy at the U.S. Small Business Administration. We are an independent federal agency tasked with being the regulatory watchdogs for small business. So the majority of the work that I'm doing focuses on Administrative Procedure Act, rulemaking, and then policy within my specific portfolio, which is agriculture, energy, and natural resources.
Great, thank you for being here. Paulina?
Hi, everyone. I'm Paulina Vera. I am a professorial lecturer in law at the GW Law Immigration Clinic. So I supervise second and third year law students as they represent their clients before various immigration agencies, such as the immigration courts, ICE, and USCIS. Actually, myself was a student in the immigration clinic when I attended GW Law, so I'm an alum of the school. But I returned in 2017 in this current role, which is a professor position, non-tenure track, but currently exploring shifting to a tenure track position. And in addition to working with the clinic students, I've also taught Immigration Law 1, the doctrinal class before.
Great, thank you. Dana?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having this panel. I'm so honored to be on it. So my name is Dana Weeks, pronouns she, her. I am currently an entrepreneur. I just recently started my business, Thrive Architects, which is a full embodiment of who I am right now and kind of the direction I want to live my life. Thrive is a company that focuses on building policy platforms to advance humanity for historically marginalized groups. And so we have three areas of focus. One is on strategic policy consulting. The second is on doing policy education workshops for advocates and students, which will eventually become a nonprofit. And then the third is focused on advocates themselves, particularly women of color, how do you center themselves back in their own belonging, but also how do women of color feel safe within their own agency, which is what I call mental rest. So I'm quite excited about this endeavor. It's quite new, but that's the path I'm on right now.
Great. Thank you as well for being here. Mariah?
Everyone, my name is Mariah Blackbird Perry. I'm a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe in South Dakota, and I am also the Tribal Mitigation Manager at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, or we call it EPIC. My current role, I specialize in environmental law, specifically environmental markets and compensatory mitigation. So I work a lot with the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, and trying to better the policy and work with federal agencies to better the policy for compensatory mitigation so tribes can participate in compensatory mitigation. And it's an honor to be here and really looking forward to this discussion.
Great. Thank you as well. So we'll just go ahead and get started with the questions in the panel itself. And again, we appreciate you all being here watching, whether you're live or watching the recording. So Dana, we will start with you. How did you get into the field that you are currently in, especially as an entrepreneur? What made you take that leap?
Sure. So when I graduated from college, there was no way I ever thought I would be an entrepreneur. In fact, my mom always says the universe conspires to look out for everyone, but especially fools and children. And that's all to say that I had no idea really what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do actually graduating college. So I just tried a number of things. I first worked for the Center for Community Change, where I did policy research. I then moved over to the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, where I was introduced to organizing work, but then also focusing on the implementation of policy at the time. The Help America Vote Act had just been passed by Congress and signed into law. And so we were doing a lot of the implementation around that. That led me actually to explore organizing more. And so I became a field organizer in Ohio for the Kerry campaign. And then from there, I transitioned to become a paralegal at a firm then called Sandler Reith and Young that focused on political law. And that's when I was introduced to regulatory work. And so through those experiences, I realized that I loved organizing, I loved policy, and I loved regulatory work, but I didn't like any of them in isolation. And that's how I really started to talk to a lot of people to understand that there were these folks called lawyer lobbyists who did congressional work, but then also did a lot of regulatory work. And that was, for me, my sweet spot. I could feel like I could show up in my full self in all of that. So I actually went to law school knowing I wanted to be a lawyer lobbyist and ended up at first Patton Boggs. And I made a little, some of that decision because one, I needed to develop key skills, substantive skills. Two, I needed to be in areas where my passion could turn into an asset. And then three, I needed to think about my family. My parents were born in Barbados. So I had to think about some financial decision-making there. So that's kind of my pathway. I was at Patton Boggs for 6 years, then lateraled over to Arnold & Porter, where I left as a managing director and decided to take a year off of healing and focused on rest, and then decided to become an entrepreneur. I was ready to kind of step out and create a space that I thought I wanted to see in the world and to offer to other women of color in the world.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Mariah, would you mind chiming in?
Yeah, of course. I'm sure like many of you, it has been a journey to how I got here. So I started out in community college. I earned my bachelor's from there, Oglala Lakota College. It's a tribal college, smaller tribal college in South Dakota. And when I was in college, I actually started out in nursing. And I'm a first generation lawyer for my family. I don't know a lot of lawyers previously to coming, even thinking about going to law school or when I was an undergrad. So I started out in nursing. My sweet mother has been a nurse for over 30 years for the Indian Health Service and on our reservation. And I thought that would be a really good path for me. Well, it turns out I didn't like it. I was not meant to be a nurse. And I ended up switching into general studies and tribal law, indigenous studies. And I always thought, in high school and throughout college, taking advocacy classes and kind of more looking at law and order and, different things, I thought, being a lawyer would be cool. It would be awesome. I'd have the knowledge, and I just didn't know anybody on how the path you get there. And I think for me, something that really pushed me into going to law school when I was thinking about it is I was a witness to the No DAPL protests that happened in Standing Rock up in Cannonball. And that for me, it was a really nice clash of traditional Lakota law coming through, but also I just didn't completely understand on the ground level what was going on with environmental impact statements and federal Indian law. And I really wanted to learn more so I could, provide for my people and have a seat at the table. So I started on the path of, going to law school and what all that consisted of. I attended a pre-law summer institute program at the American Indian Law Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2017. I was actually supposed to go to Boulder, Colorado in 2017, but it just did not feel right for me. So I ended up pulling my own law school application, and I was so heartbroken. And my friends that had met at PLSI encouraged me to go still pursue that dream that I had, and that want of knowledge, and to have that power for my own people. And so I ended up applying to several different law schools, one of which was ASU Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. And I got in, and it was a dream. It was perfect, and it gave me all the tools necessary that I needed. My focus was in federal Indian law, economic development, explored a lot of different things, met a lot of really great people. How I ended up here doing what I do now, I went to law school because I wanted to become a specialist. I wanted to become someone with a lot of knowledge and could explain things to my own people who didn't understand, become an asset for them, a service worker for them. And I never really took environmental law, which was surprising, but it was the reason I went to law school, and it is what I do now. And I got into my position with EPIC because my fiance at the time, now husband, was actually moving to Alabama to become a helicopter pilot for the U.S. Army. And I wanted to stay in my field. I wanted to stay working with and for tribes and for tribal people. And, at that point, I really had no idea where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, but I took a leap of faith, and it has been amazing since then. So that is how I ended up here. So, yes.
Great. Thank you. Paulina?
Yeah, so likewise, when I was growing up, I didn't know any attorneys. I told my mom when I was 8 years old, we went on a family trip to DC, and I told my mom, look at all those people in suits. They must be lawyers. I'm going to be a lawyer in DC one day, which I don't know where I got that. I must have seen it on TV or something, but it was just something I used to say as a kid. And so when I was in college, thinking about my next step, I actually I went to GW for undergrad as well, and I went home to Tucson, Arizona, and I entered for Congressman Raul Grijalva right after my home state put forth a bill called SB 1070, otherwise known as the Show Me Your Papers, Please law. So it allowed for local law enforcement to stop anyone that they suspected were in the United States without immigration status. Obviously, the concern there was a lot racial profiling. And so the congressman was very outspoken about that bill. He called actually for a boycott of the state of Arizona. And so me as an intern, I had to field calls all summer from constituents who were either for the congressman's stance or against it. And I always say that internship was the catalyst for me becoming an immigration attorney, because not only did I see just how really how vile people could be when it comes to folks without status in the United States. But I also learned about, how convoluted the paths to citizenship were as well. I am the daughter of 2 immigrants, so that is also part of my life. Growing up in Arizona, it was a big part of my life too. We were an hour away from the U.S.-Mexico border. And my dad rest in peace, was from Peru, and he had a very thick accent, darker complexion. There's definitely microaggressions I saw against him throughout my life. But really after SB 1070, I just saw how completely divisive immigration as an issue was. And so I decided to go to law school to become an immigration attorney. Like I said, I did the clinic, and after law school, I was at a local nonprofit. It's an immigrant rights nonprofit. I was the only immigration staff attorney there for about a year and a half. And then this position that I currently have opened up. A lot of women of color professors often say that they accidentally fall into legal academia. And that's because, at least for me, that was never presented as a viable career path when I was in law school. No one ever said, you know, you could be a law professor. And so at first I was a supervising attorney. I didn't get my professorial lecturer in law title until 2019, because again, I didn't know really that that was going to be the path that I was going to take. But I often say I have sort of the best of both worlds, because I still get to practice immigration law. We do so on a pro bono basis. We're very well researched at GW. So I like that we're able to offer those services to the community. But at the same time, I also get to work with law students, which is a whole new skill set. It's definitely, you know, a lot of learning lessons about what it means to be a good supervisor, an effective supervisor. And I often say, like, my model is I want to be the professor that I wish I had in law school. So that's how I try to be with my students. And also because, you know, working in immigration law can be pretty tough. But the reason I love working with law students is because I feel like it's hard to stay jaded for too long when you're around that fresh energy all the time. You know, students who really just like want to fight the good fight and want to do the best that they can for their clients. So yeah, so now I'm in this role, and like I said, I love it.
Thank you. The jaded comment is a real real thing, right? The more years you continue to practice, especially in heavy practice areas, or heavy emotionally. Priyanka.
So I guess I am the poster child for moving around within your career. So I knew I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 10, went to law school, ended up in family law. So had a family law litigation fellowship right out of law school. And then went and clerked in DC Superior Court. Loved what I was doing, but decided that I didn't want to be a full-time litigator once my clerkship ended, and knew that I would get burnt out if I was doing it. But I did enjoy sort of the client contact and the client side of things. And so whatever position I wanted to do, I needed to know that it was going to make an impact, either directly on a client or at a bigger or kind of big picture scale. So when this job with Advocacy became available, it sort of married those two goals of mine of being legal adjacent, but also understanding what the impact of the work that we're doing would have. And so in this role, you're really kind of consensus building, you're doing grassroots work, and then filing comment letters based on the impacts that the rules will have on small businesses. So ultimately, your client is small business, and you're, working on policy issues related to small business. In terms of the portfolio I was given, it really just fell into my lap. So sometimes when you're the rookie, you get all of the issues nobody else wants. And so, 7 years later, here I am still enjoying, energy and natural resource and ag law. But I really think you're able to move around and do lots of things. And so I would just say, like, don't box yourself in. If you don't like what you're doing, figure out a path and figure out a new way to get to what you want to do and what you're enjoying doing. Because I think I'm similar to Dana in that I'm sort of like a lobbyist within the federal government itself. And that's what I like doing. I like relationship building. I like consensus and coalition building, but I like still having my foot in the legal world and being able to bring that tool out when I need to use it. And I do miss being in court. And so there is pro bono work you can do if you want to be in court. But if it's not something you want to do full time, then look into taking on a few cases a year. And that way you get to do the best of everything that you want to do and really form your own trajectory for your career.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that, I can resonate with parts of what everyone has said here today, just in general, but I think we'll get to the question I want to ask a little bit later on. But to start with, it sounded as if a common theme I've heard, and I've experienced myself, is that we didn't really have anyone who was a lawyer to kind of look to, right? Or we kind of just fell into it on our own. At least I did, as well as several others on the call. So with that, did you have a mentor or sponsor that guided you into the field you're in? And if you did, what advice did they have for you? We will start with Mariah.
You know, beginning, I actually did not have a mentor, actually guiding me into the field that I'm in. I met a lot of them along the way throughout the work and meetings and that I would have, meeting different people with different environmental markets, people who had knowledge, different compensatory mitigation bankers. And, one of them that I met, his name is Bartlett Durand. He actually used to work for Epic, and he really encouraged me and kind of really opened my eyes to seeing, because I never knew before that there were so many different things that lawyers could do. That's not something anybody ever mentioned to me in law school, or something I have ever really seen, how many lawyers are everywhere doing all these amazing things and putting their tools to use. And so he really encouraged me that you can be diverse, you can have different opportunities. Specifically for me, we're in the military, and so we move every so often a years, and it's hard to establish a career and establish roots in a certain subject area and what you want to do. And so he really encouraged me, have fluidity and take all the opportunities as they come. And so that was something that I really took away from him. But initially I didn't have mentors. I didn't have anybody that told me that. And so I think knowing that knowledge and knowing what I had known now, I probably would have did things a little bit differently coming out of law school, and kind of the path that I took. I don't regret any of it, but I think that's something that's really important for young law students and young attorneys to know, is to have that fluidity and take the opportunities as they come, because you don't only get to be a Law and Order like on TV, what they show. It's just so many different things, and there's such a vast variety of things that lawyers can do, especially women. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm a conflicts attorney. I've never seen one on a show, right? So it's kind of just hidden roles. Prianka?
Yeah, I would agree with Mariah. I think early on I did not have a mentor, and then as I 1L 2L years sort of started seeking out opportunities to network with people and organically kind of created relationships with mentors, and now I have probably 3 very strong mentors that I look to for advice and support. And so I guess one thing for if there are law students listening to this, please definitely seek out those opportunities. It might be awkward to do so, but any opportunity you have to network, and if you see that you're connecting with someone, then ask to have a call or ask to chat with them and have a coffee, because those organic relationships really do end up helping you in the future. And it doesn't need to be, oh, I'm looking for a job, please help me get a job. It can just be, hey, I want to bounce this idea off of you, or I don't really like this path that I'm on currently. Do you know anyone who's navigated finding a new path? And that was really important for me when I was transitioning from this sort of family law trajectory I was on into this new role, is having people who could say, it's going to be okay, these are some good resources for you if you want to get up to speed on the law. This is how you can phrase it if you're applying to new jobs and they ask you why you switched out of a particular area of law. I think having those people to bounce ideas off of is really meaningful and helpful. And so to the extent that you can try to cultivate those relationships early, it really does help you later on in your career. And even now, mid-career, I'm still calling on those same mentors for advice, because everyone always needs advice. And some of my mentees, I've learned a lot from them. And so it's kind of this back and forth relationship that you have with people. And so I really do stress to all of my mentees the importance of networking and relationship building throughout your career, because it does have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Dana?
I'm sure. So I think I'm going to answer the question just slightly differently. I'll more so focus on kind of the mentorships, relationships built throughout my career that's kind of led me where I am now. I will first say that for me, there were so many iterations of myself throughout my career, just like there are for everyone in their life. And so I needed to create a community. I don't call it a network. I needed to create a community of people where they allowed me to be vulnerable so that we could have a real, true understanding of trust, where their honesty met my needs, not necessarily their honesty stoked my ego. So I didn't need someone who is like, girl, you're good at everything, you'll be fine. I needed someone to say, no, you need to hold yourself accountable for this, or you really need to dig down and ground yourself in these skills. And yes, it's going to be hard, but you need to do it. And then I needed people to say when it's time to walk away. But it was more so for the best interest of self, because we had that relationship of vulnerability. So I actually, as I progressed throughout my career, my community of core people like that became smaller because it's real. And there are fewer people who are willing to have those hard conversations and honest conversations with you. So in addition to this community of support, which Charlene Stanberry is a part of, I also had an advisory board throughout my career. I don't, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but I don't put people on pedestals. I wasn't allowed to as a child. We'll dig into that later. But so I don't have one person who say, I really thought their career was where I wanted to go. I actually look at people of, are you really good at writing? Are you really good at connecting with other people? Things like, and I had an advisory committee around me, and people who would remind me of the skills and values that I wanted to uplift. Maybe the time wasn't ripe. So this whole entrepreneurial time is actually beautiful because I do have people on my advisory committee who have those skill sets. And then lastly, I'll say, for me, I had to learn some things in order for these mentorship and community relationships to work out. And one of those things was I was not comfortable because I was the child of immigrants. I worked really hard and I was in survival mode. I was not comfortable asking for specific help. And so I needed to be honest with people about when I really needed help. And that's what deepened a lot of the mentoring relationships that I had. I had to shed that survival skill, which is also a form of ego, to let it go in order for people to truly, truly help me as well.
Yeah, I can imagine all of us have felt that and have been there, especially kind of like how the question started, right? Not having anyone else to really look to initially. Um, I mean, at times I'm still in the survival mode, so I don't even know if I've I've fully shed that yet. So maybe we need to connect offline so I can learn some new techniques as well and be a part of this community. Paulina?
Yeah, I'm lucky to have met my biggest mentor and advocate in law school. He's actually the director of the immigration clinic. So he's currently my boss. He just happens to be Latino as well, also the son of immigrants. And he has been a tenured professor at GW for over 25 years. So not only is he a mentor for me, but I think it's also important to talk about sponsors. And because of, how long he's been at GW, his status as a tenured professor, he's been able to open a lot of doors for me, and provide me with a lot of opportunities, or ask the school for funding to help me with opportunities to go to conferences and things like that. In fact, my first week on the job, he's like, "Oh, you're going to go on CNN this week." And I was like a baby attorney. Pretty sure I blacked out all 30 seconds I was on CNN, but it was definitely a learning opportunity. And I think something that he's really done for me is pushed me to do things that honestly terrify me. But I think that that's how we grow, right? As we embrace the challenges. And now that's advice that I give my students as well. If it scares you, that's, it means you care. And that's never a bad thing. It's impossible not to be nervous. So we never tell our students, don't be nervous, but it's about controlling those nerves and being prepared, right? And working on the confidence piece of it. And so I think that's something that Professor Benitez has done for me personally. I would also add the importance of affinity groups. For me, in law school, my law school family was the Latin American Law Student Association, LALSA. My 1L year, I found the Hispanic Bar Association of DC, HBADC. And I just remember walking into my first HVADC meeting and just seeing, a room full of Latino, Latina, Latine attorneys. And they were all so like just willing to talk to like a first year law student and offer advice. And it was like affirming, right? To see just like a group of people that have made it, like got through it. Like I really doubted myself during 1L. I thought about maybe leaving law school. I thought it wasn't a good fit for me. I questioned my intelligence. A lot of people just in my section really wanted to go into big law, and that's not what I wanted to do. And so I just really questioned myself, right? So being in that kind of space with folks who became my mentors, right, became people that I could go to vent or for advice and all that stuff, was really, really helpful for me. And it also put me on a track to get various leadership positions in that organization. So after law school, like I was a co-chair for a committee. I'm serving my 4th year on the board, and I'm actually currently president-elect of the organization. And so again, I think really tapping into just networks, but for me in particular, it's been like these affinity organizations have been tremendously helpful for me in my career.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Sorry, I'm a part of a few, and I find that it's very helpful to just to feel as if you have someone who kind of just understands more of the nuances of what you've been going through, right? So it's good to have. For this next question, I'm going to keep it a little bit more open because we've kind of touched on it, but so in the roles that you've been in, right? Do you have any women role models that you've looked up to? And if so, did you express any interest to them, and how did that go? And I will just, if it's okay, I will just start and give a little bit of what happened with me for one of mine. So I met our Chicago Bar Association president a few years ago. It was a Black woman, and I was just so inspired by the things that she was saying and what she kind of offered. It was maybe the only very few women in the Chicago Bar Association that had taken on the presidents and less minorities, right? And so I wanted to just talk to her, and I was already a part of the organization, but I still felt a little bit intimidated and a little young to reach out, should I say. And I ended up just messaging her on LinkedIn, and I said, hey, I'd love to have you on a panel for my women lawyers group for the Chicago Bar. Can you speak to me? And can we discuss more outside of that? And she immediately responded. And I ended up telling her later, I thought that you wouldn't have responded to me. I thought you were too busy and, you had too big of a role going on. And this is a volunteer role. And she said, no, I'm never too busy to kind of help out, those who are really pushing for things and need the help, and those like ourselves. So if you have anybody that you've looked up to and how did you express your interest, feel free to speak up.
So similar to Paulina, not necessarily affinity groups, but they're also professional bar associations. So the ABA, or for Mariah and I, the Environmental Law Institute. So if you're attending some of these events, I, would go to some of the professional development events. And if I heard someone speak and I thought, wow, like she has a really interesting career trajectory, or wow, we really align on this issue, I connect on LinkedIn, send a quick message, say, thank you so much for, the panel. You had some great insights. And there was one in particular where I said, hey, do you have maybe 10 minutes? I could do a quick call with you. I'd love to bounce some ideas off of you. And now I have her personal cell, we text each other updates. And I think that first initial step is so important, but so intimidating. And even now it's intimidating because you're like, there's a fear of rejection, right? That this person's going to be like, who the heck are you? And why are you contacting me? I don't have time for this. There's that fear that you're wasting this person's time. But that initial step is just so important. And I really would challenge everyone to do that more often. And like Dana and I connected on LinkedIn before this panel and sent each other a little message in LinkedIn, and now we're connected. So if there's something that comes up, we can bounce ideas off of each other. But I think taking that first step is just really, really crucial to getting those relationships. And then the second thing I would say is having a specific ask. So if you are trying to establish a mentor relationship, figure out what your goals are for that person. Is this going to be someone that you want to guide you through your career, where you're going to be asking them technical questions about things that come up? Is this someone you really just need life advice about? Like, how do I be a mom and still maintain my career? Or is this someone where you want the job they have? And so you want to ask them, how do I get the job they have? But I think establishing those parameters for yourself and having a specific goal in mind has been really helpful to me in establishing those mentor relationships. And then finally, contact and follow up. So I have like a Google spreadsheet of everyone that I've spoken with, or just use LinkedIn and use your LinkedIn messages. And that's, a history of the last time you talked to them. And if you haven't reached out in a few months, send a quick note and say, hey, how's it going? Here's a quick update on my life. How are you? And that way you keep those relationships fresh. And it's not that I necessarily need anything from them, like a recommendation or a job. It's just that I want to keep that relationship going so that, if I do have a question in the future, it's not this weird sort of, hey, I haven't talked to you in 2 years and now I need something from you. It's more organic. Or they'll think of me, like Shar is the perfect example of someone who keeps up with her relationships. And, she and I are friends now. We're on several committees for organizations together, but those things pay off. And so those connections really pay off.
Yeah, and thank you. Anyone else have any specific role models, women role models that they reached out to?
So I have a number of women that I hold in high regard throughout my career. I actually wrote an article about my mom banning me from having role models because there's this tendency to put people on pedestals and to see their lives as nonlinear, just like they're always successful. And it kind of takes away from the humanity of who people are. So I look at the attributes of people and try to understand their vulnerable moments too, as a mentee and also as a mentor to folks. One of my role models was Meredith Jolivet when I was at Patton Boggs, and to this day, we are now just really close friends. And I can't believe her daughters were like 1 when I met her, and now in like 2 or 3 years, they're going to be applying to college, which is like freaking me out. But the reason why I talk about Meredith a lot is because she was one of those folks who's very honest about when her life was great and when it wasn't, and about the pitfalls that she had. And so we could have real honest conversations. It wasn't like a glorification of her career. That wasn't like the framework of our meetings. And so one of the things that Meredith had me do was like exercises, which I thought was so intriguing, the amount of thought she put into me. When I was burnt out, she would ask, I want you to write a list of the things you celebrated in the past 2 months or 3 months. And I had nothing on it. And she's like, we need to talk about that. So we had some real honest conversations about self, not just about here's career. Because of that, Meredith has taught me a lot about how to approach mentors. I agree with everything that Prianka had shared about reaching out, don't having the hesitancy to reach out to others. But I also think it's important when you reach out to know that people could be going through things. So sometimes your emails don't have to be, how are you? All these questions in it. Sometimes it could be just thinking of you, hope you're well. And that can go a long way in a relationship with your mentors, because it shows care from the other end without a responsibility or obligation of always needing to respond during busy times. So Meredith Jolivet was one of my fantastic mentors. She has taught me how to really do a lot of introspection work, which has helped to inform how I navigate my career and giving me confidence to pivot when I need to pivot.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we're really here, or we're not really here, but we're here to also talk about a seat at the table, right? And how we know kind of how we got there, but can we talk about the obstacles and challenges you faced when trying to get a seat at the table in your field? Dana, can we start with you?
Sure, I'll keep this brief. I actually wrote down points for this one. So I know we've talked also about seat at the table and this idea of microaggressions. I don't believe in microaggressions. Aggression's aggression. it takes the forms. I think microaggression sometimes gives people an excuse to behave the way they behave. And so, but when for the terminology, so having a seat at the table, especially dealing with aggression of all forms, I think one, it's important that you first have to understand your grounding. I mentor so many people when I was at the firm who took the firm's productivity goals to mean that that's what their value was. And I was like, well, what is your value? What are you trying to leverage? What are you trying to get out of where you are? What kind of launching pad is it? You have to have a strong understanding of self, because if you get into the habit of normalizing people dictating for you what your next step should be, you're going to be the last person to know when you lose yourself. So that's one thing that I think was important for a seat at the table, and also understanding when you need to stay, how to grow, and when you need to leave a place to go on to the next thing. The other thing is to be honest with yourself. You got to take your ego out of it. There are times where you're going to get feedback where that feedback is really helpful. You're going to it's sobering, but it's helpful to know I got to put in the work here. But then there are other times where that feedback is not helpful because it is an aggression and you need to know when to distinguish. And that's when your community and mentorship can come into play. And then the other thing is I'm going to say to you, you need to know when to leave. A lot of us especially as women of color, we think working hard and being nice and fitting a certain mold is going to advance us. It is not. It is a foundational skill in order to start out your career in terms of you should be professional, you should work hard, but that's not a formula for advancement. And so for me, I did a lot of self-work and a lot of values work every 6 months with myself to remind myself where I needed to be at a particular place. And then the last thing I'll just say, this is a whole nother panel, so I'm only going to briefly mention it. Make sure you put yourself in a good financial situation in some of these jobs, like especially if you're in big law. Don't spend all your money, because pivoting also requires the financial ability to do so. And that's the only way I could look to being an entrepreneur, because I took my financial liberation quite seriously from day one.
Great tips and great points. Prianka?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. I feel like it's come up in law school as much as it's come up in the career life. I think like the earliest memory I have is I went to a networking event my 1L year and tried to ask someone a question, and he basically was like, oh, well, why do you care? You're a young, cute girl, you'll get a job. And so there's those overt, like Dana's saying, like overt aggressive actions. And then there's sort of these like quieter things that are happening that you may not necessarily be keeping track of. And so for me, it was about being aware that these things are happening and then figuring out like, okay, is this something that I need to address right now? Or is this something I just need to be aware of and perhaps like track, and then down the line, if it becomes a problem, then address it. And then for me, a lot of it was just about letting my work speak for itself. So if I was at a speaking engagement and someone came up to me and they said something sort of like passive or rude or whatever to me, getting up on that stage and giving my presentation and letting the work speak for itself. And then they come up to me afterwards and they're like, oh, wow, that was a really great whatever. And just not necessarily, I guess having restraint is what I'm trying to say, like knowing when I need to speak up and say something, and knowing when I can have restraint and just let whatever it is that I'm doing speak for itself. But this is something that has come up throughout my entire career, and I think that it's not necessarily going to go away anytime soon. And so having tools in your toolbox, like Dana's saying, like doing the work yourself and having self-assessments, either giving yourself trainings on how to respond to these things, but just definitely arm yourself with good people and have tools in your toolbox anytime one of those issues comes up. I think you put yourself
You're on
mute.
mute.
I did put myself on mute. Wow, I thought I was beyond that with COVID times. We'll go Mariah, then Paulina, if that's okay.
Question is, are we still talking about microaggressions?
We're talking about microaggressions and then obstacles, challenges you face when trying to get a seat at your table. So,
Okay. Sorry, you went on mute, so I wasn't sure. So I think one of the bigger challenges, I completely echo what Dana and Priyanka are saying, but one of the things I have faced being a Native American woman is the stereotypical career path of what I should be doing versus what I'm actually doing. I've often run into, well, you're Native American and you have the background in federal Indian law, you must know everything federal Indian law, like every single case, all the nuances, every Native American attorney there is out there. And it's actually, no, I don't. I'm a rather young lawyer. I'm rather young in my career and just, exploring where I can pivot, as Dana had hinted on is, that's a big deal to be able to pivot. And that was one of my bigger obstacles and challenges I had faced coming into my field was, one, compensatory mitigation. It is environmental law and environmental lawyers would know what that is. But in my field, specifically what I'm doing it for tribes, I was fresh out of law school when I first started and I had never heard of this term. I have never heard of any tribes actually doing it. And, there are very few tribes who have nuances to that. So, getting able for people to even take me seriously, one as a woman and well versed in this area, these two different areas of environmental law and federal Indian law was another challenge I had faced. And, it was very hard to get a seat at that table and just have people listen to me and take me seriously. But one of the ways that I was able to overcome that was I always stuck myself in
I think she might have frozen unless we all froze.
I can hear you.
I can
Okay.
hear you.
Okay. Well, that's a bit awkward for this, but don't know if I should give it a second or not. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go on. Paulina, do you mind jumping in here?
Sure, of course.
Thanks.
So I always say that I have the trifecta. I'm young, a woman, and Latina. And I think that does not fit into what a lot of people think of when they think of what a lawyer should look like or is supposed to be like. And that's an obstacle that I face. The fact of the matter is, and data supports that our profession is still overwhelmingly white and male. And so, I even still go to court and the bailiff's like, oh, are you here for your hearing in broken Spanish? Even though I walk in a full suit with my file, address them in English. Not that there's anything wrong with, being a respondent in immigration court, but it's either that or I'm the translator. That's the other one I get. And so there's always assumption that I'm just could not possibly be the attorney. And then, in other spaces couldn't possibly be the professor. And so, when I was more junior attorney, I think I did what was discussed earlier, right? Is like, I was like, if I just put my head down and work hard and suddenly I will be able to overcome these presumptions people have about me. But then the more and more that these kinds of things happened, the more I just realized, no, I can never outwork these stereotypes, right? People are always going to hold these stereotypes about me. And so instead, now I just try to be as authentically myself as I can be. I'm not wearing them today, but usually, like I love to wear my hoop earrings. I have my nails done. And those things may sound silly, right? But it's like, I should be able to present myself and represent myself the way that I want to. And it should not have, I feel it should not reflect on who I am as a person or who I am as an attorney, because again, my work speaks for itself. can ask my clients. I think they're very happy with the results I've achieved for them. You can ask my students. I think they're very happy. In fact, I got a really lovely note. Yesterday was the last day of the semester. I got a really lovely note from a student who's also a woman of color. And she was just like, you know, you've done so much for me. Thank you for being so open and accessible. A lot of law professors are very scary. And so it's great that I was able to approach you, and I hope to be like half the attorney that you are. And so I realized that by presenting myself more authentically, like who I am, it is reaching the people that it needs to reach. It's not going to be for everyone. And I understand that maybe in certain workspaces, not everyone's going to have the luxury maybe to do what I'm able to do. But you know, at the end of the day, I do this for my clients, I do this for my students, and I do it for myself. And again, I said that I want to be the professor that I wish I had when I was in law school. And I feel like that is resonating with the people that it needs to resonate with. So yeah, I mean, you know, I'm still gonna, I think, always encounter those obstacles. And I guess the other thing about that is, you know, sometimes it's a choice in the moment. Do I call it out? What's the best way to approach it? Because sometimes I just don't have the mental energy. And sometimes I feel like it shouldn't be on me to explain to you why this is not okay. But also now, like I said, right, I do this for my students. So if I'm in court and that happens and I'm with a student and they happen to be, you know, a person from a certain background that may also face similar obstacles, right? I also now feel like I have a responsibility to model for them, you know, the appropriate response in those situations as well. So yeah, I think that's something that's just come as I've worked on my confidence. I think we might talk about imposter syndrome in a little bit as I've worked on that as well, as I've just gotten more experienced. But again, now I just feel like, you know, I'm just gonna be me. And if you like it, great. If you don't, well, I'm sorry, but I'm here to stay.
Yeah, definitely understand that. And I also think that it's taken us all kind of time to kind of get there, right? And understand ourselves and figure out who we are and what we will accept, right? And tolerate and what we won't, which is great. I'm glad to be in that time, I think, of my life and try to encourage others. And I'm sure each of you do too, and it definitely sounds like it, others to kind of take that approach as well. And they do it a little bit sooner than I've had the chance to. So I am going to just send a reminder out to the participants who are live. If you have any questions for the panel, please submit them through the Q&A. I will try to get to them, but I know we're kind of dwindling down on time. And if not, I can more than happy to submit them and pass them on to the panel, and maybe they can answer and redistribute back to the attendees after. So if you have those, please submit those in the next minute. And then I'm just going to go ahead and go on to the next question. And I really want to keep this a little bit more tailored since we are running out of time. So looking at the definition of imposter syndrome and how you overcome it. And Paulina, I'm just going to start with you. I know that you mentioned it. And so if you can talk, and then I would like to go to Mariah since she got cut off previously. So to kind of talk about imposter syndrome and how you overcame it.
Sure. So I think I always see imposter syndrome as twofold. Like I see it as in part like maybe things that I inflict on myself. And that may be my upbringing, my cultural background, gender norms, you know, just not feeling confident in myself. But I also see it as like like being made to feel like you don't belong from outside factors, being made to feel like you're the other or othering you as well. And I think that a lot of that happens, you know, in our profession just by virtue of sitting in classrooms and you look around and not everyone looks like you or has the same background as you, right? To some of the more overt things that we've talked about as well, right? So that sort of being made to feel like you're not welcome, you're an other in this space. And so I guess in regards to like myself, I don't know that I've completely overcome imposter syndrome. Like I'm not going to sit here and lie and be like, I got it. Like I am definitely more confident than when I first started my career, and certainly way more confident than when I was a law student. But you know, as I grow in my career, each stage, like I said, is scary, and there's scary opportunities, and I'm always going to kind of have that self-doubt in my head, like, can I do this? But I think a couple of things is like, this is advice that I give like my mentees and my students. First, I always tell people, talk to yourself like how you talk to your friends, because I'm like the best cheerleader. If someone calls me and they're like, oh, I'm feeling this way and that way, I will be there and I will tell them all the ways that they're wonderful and all the reasons that they should not be feeling the way that they are. But I have a much harder time doing that for myself. And so sometimes where I have to take a step back and be like, why are you, being so mean to yourself? Why are you so self-critical? Like, maybe be kinder to yourself, give yourself more grace. The other thing is, and this is something I got from my mentor, Professor Benitez, he always encourages me to keep a list of my accomplishments. So like, for example, like maybe today I'll update the list and I'll say, I spoke on this panel, and it'll be anything like speaking to the media, speaking engagements. I don't know, maybe I won a case or whatever the case may be, right? You could I organize it chronologically, you could organize it thematically, whatever makes sense for you. But it's good for a couple of reasons. First, when you're updating your resume, it makes it easier. So you're not trying to think of all the things that you did. I have a performance review due today to GW, so I will go to my list and, kind of plug some things in. But it also really helps with the imposter syndrome, because whenever I'm feeling like down on myself, and, thinking maybe not so positive thoughts, I always go look at that list and see like my body of work since I've started at GW. And I'm like, wow, I did that. Like, I'm a badass. And so I think sometimes just seeing it written down in paper form, like in front of you, just really helps you like realize, right, that you've come so far. And so I like to look at it too, because I always think about the growth. It's like you started here and now you're here. Like, that's amazing. And you can only go up from here, right? You can only do bigger and better things from here. So I think those two things have been tremendously helpful. This is a topic I could talk about a lot longer, but I think I'll pause here and let my fellow panelists answer.
That was great. I completely echo what Paulina says on the definition and how to handle it. As I've grown through my career, I too think I don't think imposter syndrome ever really leaves you, but it's something I've learned to recognize and something I've learned to really define what is excitement versus what is imposter syndrome that I'm experiencing right now. Someone once told me, if you're not nervous, if you don't have butterflies in your stomach before you go on a big panel or before you go into a courtroom, it's, you're comfortable. And I'm not a person to stay comfortable in anything. I think, chase the things that make you uncomfortable, because that's how you grow, challenge yourself, versus imposter syndrome, where, I feel like a lot of it sometimes is in my own head, like, oh my goodness, I'm a woman, I'm, Native American, I'm about to go talk to these massive federal agencies, and I just completely freeze sometimes, but just really getting in my own head. And someone mentioned grounding earlier. One of the things my law school focused on is I took a class on meditation and that kind of thinking and breathing through. So that's something I often do, and just, completely hype myself up. And if I need a little extra hype, I always, I call my mom or my best friend and just tell them, hey, can you give me a quick pep talk, because I'm about to go on this panel and it's freaking me out. And so always having that circle and that community around you is one thing that definitely helped me. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So the last question that I have is, what advice do you have for young women lawyers interested in pursuing a career in your field? Alternatively, something that you wish you would have known. And then we will start with Dana.
I'll keep it brief. I think be open to possibilities around you. And in order to have that openness, I think you need to feel safe within your own decision-making. So I would say, start doing some practices of, I know this may sound silly, but like meditation, walks, things that ground you so that you know what it's like to feel safe within, and then make decisions from there. But if you're always constantly feeling in fight or flight and you normalize that in your life, I think your decisions will respond more to that, and there will be less opportunities for you to see.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think for me, it was really just about not being afraid to try new things and not getting in my own way. And so just, you know, if an opportunity is presented to you and it looks interesting and you want to try it, and it's not necessarily the type of law you thought you'd be doing, or not, or, you know, it's a government job, but you wanted to be private sector, but it's a great job and you love the people, don't get in your own way. Try these things and, you know, give it an earnest effort. And then nothing is set in stone. So if you absolutely don't like where you are or what you're doing, perhaps, yes, you should stay at least a year or two, right, for your resume, but always be open to looking for new things if you don't like where you are.
I think something is echoing both Dana and Priyanka, but also you can do both and you can do anything you set your mind to. So one of the big things that one of my now mentors mentioned was being a mother and being a lawyer. Like, no, you don't have to choose between the two, and there are plenty of opportunities out there for you to be both and do both very well. So that is my advice.
I think I'm going to tailor mine just specifically for academia, because something I would love to see are more professors of color, particularly women of color professors. So I think the biggest thing, but this applies across the board, right, is to ask questions. I think there's this idea sometimes that if we ask questions or if we don't know, that's somehow a reflection on our intelligence. And I just don't find that to be true. I think you should ask questions, you should accept when you don't know things. And particularly when it comes to academia, like I mentioned, I'm now exploring, you know, looking on the tenure track side of things. And I realized that there's just a lot of information out there that like other people just know, but I just don't know, right? And so I've had to like find folks who are willing to talk to me, ask those questions, like attend webinars to learn the information. And with that, and I guess I'll end also recommending a really fantastic book. It's by Professor Mira Dio. It's called Unequal Profession, Race and Gender in Legal Academia. And that was also very eye-opening to me about just the path that women, and then also particularly looking at women of color, face when entering legal academia and the challenges that they've had, and you know how they've may or may not have been able to overcome those. So again, just getting all the information, asking the questions, so that you can make the most informed decision for yourself.
Yeah, these are great tips and great advice. I will kind of leave it with one more. I have this saying that someone once told me back in law school, and it was, if the door's open, walk through it. And so I've kind of taken that approach as I progress through my career, that if there's an opportunity and I'm kind of questioning, do I feel qualified enough? Am I going to be the only person of color there? Am I going to be the only woman there? I sit back and I'm like, you know, the door was opened and it's time for me to just walk through it and not be afraid. And I will deal with whatever comes with it at that time. And so that is about all the time we have for our program. I want to thank the attendees for tuning in and for engaging, for watching at home. And last but not least, thank you, Mariah, Priyanka, Paulina, and Dana for being with us today. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week.